Indonesia is an archipelago located in Southeast Asia with over 250 million inhabitants and has been the melting pot of foreign culture and art for centuries. For thousands of years, Indonesian natives felt little influence from the outside world due to a geographic isolation, but by the turn of the 2nd century, early Indian dynasties began migrating toward Indonesia, primarily to the islands of Sumatra, Java, and Bali. With the conquest of the Indian dynasties arose the first religious influences of Hinduism and Buddhism. Much of the contemporary Indonesian art still stems from Hindu and Buddhist art introduced in the early years of Indian rule. This art largely consists of dyed fabrics, sculptures, monuments, and wood carvings, usually of influential Hindu and Buddhist figures such as Ganesh and Buddha respectively. The architecture during the time was consisted using brick and mortar of vine sap and palm sugar, which was used to create structures such as Majapahit temple and shrines, which are still abundant in Bali to date. By the 8th century, trade routes had flourished between Indonesia and both India and China, further increasing the movement of culture and ideas. These trade routes inevitably led to the introduction of new religions and subsequent fall of Indian dynasties. By the 14th century, Islam quickly became the most prominent religion in Indonesia. Islamic art, unlike many other religions, does not consist of paintings, drawings, sculptures, and ceramics. Islamic art is primarily in the form of architecture and clothing. The most abundant Islamic architecture in Indonesia are mosques, such as the Masjid Istiqlal, as described on the screen. Furthermore, Islam influenced the already existent and popular Indonesian textile, the batik, with Arabic inscriptions and Islamic motifs. Aside from the rise of Islam, trade to Indonesia exponentially grew as well, especially with Western nations such as Portugal, who relied on Indonesia for their spice export. However, by the 17th century, the Dutch East India Trading Company was dominating most trade coming through Asia, and ultimately expelled the Portuguese from Indonesia, establishing the rule over the now coined Spice Islands. Like most other countries colonized by Western nations, Indonesia was also heavily influenced by Western art, music, and architecture. Oil paintings, for example, were introduced to Indonesia by Western painter Radin Saleh, who studied art in Europe and led to a tremendous surge of oil paintings in Indonesia, seen today. Furthermore, instruments such as the violin, cello, piano, and guitar were also popularized by the Dutch and integrated into contemporary Indonesian music. Lastly, the Dutch influenced a transition through architectural styles of Neoclassicism, Neo-Gothic, Neo-Renaissance, and Art Deco. After a relatively oppressive rule, the Dutch were expelled from Indonesia upon the end of World War II, and the reign of what's considered contemporary art began. Though all foreign rulers have been expelled ever since, the influence of these cultures and religions described is still very prevalent in Indonesian art, particularly influences from Hinduism and Buddhism. Modern art, however, has evolved from a method of conveying cultural and religious ideas to a more political platform. For example, Eko Nugroho usually creates work inspired by the environment and focuses on both local Indonesian traditions with a mix of popular global culture. Wiyoga Muhardanto focuses on pieces that ironically display the increasing concern with consumerism in Indonesia. Lastly, Eddie Hara, one of the best internationally known Indonesian artists, fuses together outside urban art with traditional Indonesian culture. The unique history of Indonesia ultimately led to a diverse and variable art form, unlike any other in the world.